welcome. This is VMware vSphere 8 and what's new. So we're going to cover a couple of things. I did throw in a slide at the last minute because today there were some announcements covering update 2. I'll start with an easy one. Who here is running a version of 6.x? 6.0, 6.5, 6.7? Few I got yesterday, but still some hands. Okay, so this would be pretty good. Some of these features you're going to say, hey, those aren't really new features. Those are things that were introduced in 7. You're absolutely right, except they were features that have been improved on yet again. Features, especially surrounding lifecycle management that have been improved upon. So I will cover those, even if you're like, hey, I already know about this because it was introduced in 7. Those features are there, but better in 8. I think I've already welcomed you. And introduction-wise, we are actually dividing and conquering right now. One of my other captains is up on the main stage presenting this workshop as well, because we were actually a full workshop, so they overflowed into that. But I'll get into this next screen here. So Semya is out on the main stage presenting right now this exact session as well. We have my associate Jake, who's a staff solution engineer out of the East. I'm Brad Bentley, your staff cloud infrastructure engineer. Yeah, let's get going. I do want to talk a little bit about the process. I know no one raised their hands when I asked if this is your first time to HOL, but I do want to cover this lab specifically because it has a lot of attention right now. So this lab, it's been developed, everyone that you see here, everyone usually walking around in a blue shirt. We volunteer for the hands-on labs. This isn't our day job. We're just passionate about this and we like delivering this content. So that takes working through the nights and weekends to make sure this catalog is developed, making sure this all the content is there, the lab itself, all the steps are ready for you. So we appreciate your feedback, good, bad, or in between. We love it because it helps us keep producing this content. This particular lab, while you might not know, has a whole lot of our feature set running beneath it. The lab itself, and as you're taking each and every lab of these, whether today, right now, and any other time, we're utilizing vCloud Director, we utilize NSX, we're utilizing vSAN, and of course vSphere. So we are practicing what we preach when we're up here and delivering these labs and this content. This is massive infrastructure at scale, and this is living proof of it. So here is a eye chart for you on this exact pod, how it's deployed. Yes, every single one of you are the proud owners of 288 gigabytes of memory, 3 terabytes of storage, and a whole mess of CPU. Every single one of you. So when you think, it's just a little bit, probably a couple of VMs, no, that's actual size of every single seat of this lab running right now. So all 40 sitting out there, and all 50 sitting in here, and then anyone else in addition. So it starts to add up, as you can imagine. So what we're going to cover in this lab, and by all means, you don't have to sit here and listen to me talk. I will try to take a little bit of a break. Not a big fan of cigarettes. They really mess with my voice, so my throat's a little tired, so I will take a couple of breaks. But I do encourage you, go through the modules. I will talk through them. If you want to just stop and wait for me to start the next module and go on, that's perfectly fine. But there is nothing that truly builds off of another. You can usually skip all the way to the end if you wanted to and come back to the beginning. That's your call. I give you that freedom and flexibility in this lab. So module 1 is very, very simple. It's a very high-level overview of what we cover in what's new in vSphere 8. There's not going to be a lot of steps and a lot of things for you to do. By all means, you can open up Firefox, you can get logged in, you can start clicking around and playing around if you want. But we're going to start getting into things that you're going to be more hands-on with in module 2, which is going to cover vSphere Lifecycle Manager. The third module will cover resource management improvements. Module 4 will do guest OS and workload improvements. And then kind of one of my favorites. Just, you know, I live in California, so I like the green metrics story behind it, the sustainability goals and initiatives that a lot of states and a lot of countries are starting to adopt. It's a pretty cool feature, especially if you work at an organization that has any sustainability goals or is potentially looking at that. So, again, with that, I'll take a quick pause here. Feel free, get into Module 1, the What's New section. Go through it. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. It's going to be pretty light on Module 1 in understanding what we'll be covering. And so question, I mean, I was picking on just the, trying to pick out from the crowd, anyone in the 6 arena. Has anyone already upgraded to 8? Got a 7? You've upgraded it 7 times. No. All right, so you're on 7. Okay. So if you're not on any of the 6s, I'm sorry I didn't include any of the 4s and 5s or 3s. So I hope you learn a lot from this if you're in that generation of product. But so yeah, a couple people who are already on 8. Anyone on 8 update 1? Yeah. Okay. Or playing with it. Okay. Great. So then, I know I said I was going to rest my voice here. Don't listen to me. Anybody, I don't know how to question this, so it's a hand raised thing. Is anybody here not on 8 because they want to wait for 8 to bake a little bit more? Okay, that's a lot of hands. All right. So you want to wait, see how it shakes out. All right. So then for the 6s, are you waiting to see how 8 works and you're just going to try to get skipped to 8 pretty quick? Thumbs up, thumbs down? We'll see. Okay. I'd be interested for anyone on the 6s afterwards. I'd love to hear your story. During the introduction, I didn't do a very good job here. I've only been at VMware about 3.5 years. I've been a customer for 20, since the start of this. So I've been through a lot of the products. I've been through the life cycle. I've gone through the no, you can't upgrade that, all those scenarios from users, from whether it's users or management or whatever reason. So I'd like to hear those other use cases. So if you're willing to share with me, I would love to listen. And then it's about that time. You show of hands, you want me to move on to Module 2 because you're already getting into 2 and you want to hear me talk about that? Well, my captain, Jake, has informed me there's some people who are almost finished with the lab because they're overachievers. I'm going to go ahead and just get into Module 2. I'll do a lot more of that. Hopefully I can get more Q&A towards the end. So don't stress if you're still on Module 1. I'm just going to move into Module 2, talk about it a little bit more, talk about its use cases in general, and here we go. So Module 2, if you're not already in it, is covering Lifecycle Manager. So by the show of hands, as I've seen who's in and out there, that's fantastic. So on the folks that are on 7 and folks that are on 8, show of hands. I know, sorry, getting that workout in there. How many are doing image-based management? Ooh, crickets. Okay, so 1%. 1% of you. All right. So everybody else is, when I say image management, if you're not familiar with what I mean when I'm asking that, so that means you're using VMware Update Manager to manage your lifecycle and ESXi patches and versions. So, okay, so this is going to be a fantastic module when you get into this. So the improvements to lifecycle management, where this is not new, this was introduced in 7. In 8, it was further improved upon. And actually what I do cover, and I want you to be aware of in this, is that you will see a deprecation warning in vSphere 8. VMware Update Manager, the way you've loved to patch your ESXi host in your environment, will not be here forever. So VMware Update Manager will go away at some point. I can't tell you what day or when that will be, but that warning is there, which usually means it's coming soon. Reason being, all of our products from vSphere Plus, if you're in VCF and SDDC Manager, all of our other products, we are switching over to image-based management. That's the fastest and easiest way and method to manage your ESXi hosts. It's the most, I don't think I can say that any easier. It is the easiest way to do your patch management and image management of your ESXi hosts. Where the improvements have come in vSphere 8 is parallel remediation. So in 7, we improved a little bit in lifecycle management with parallel stage, where we could parallel stage the images, your ESXi host images, down to all of the hosts, and then remediate. The remediation process, though, still ran one by one through every host. That might not be a problem when you have 4 hosts in the cluster, but it might not be great when you have 96 hosts in the cluster. It might take you forever to roll through that, even with Quick Boot enabled. It might take a really long time. So those improvements that are coming in are now going to be parallel remediation. And before you start, say, but wait, hold on, we can't do that. We give you a little bit of flexibility there. What we're doing is we're allowing DRS to vMotion and cram as much workload down onto your hosts as safely possible. And we're trying to remediate as many hosts as possible at the same time. So I know I use that really big example, 96 hosts. So instead of taking 5 minutes per host, where you have 5 minutes times 96, I'm not good at math, but it's a lot of minutes. You now get it down to, I can patch 6, 7 hosts simultaneously. And now I only need to stage this in about 6 rounds of that. And I can get through with this in about an hour or 2. So we go from 10, 20 hours of patching down to 2. Sounds good to me. I'm a big fan of it. So we give a lot of that flexibility in there because we don't want to put your workloads at risk. We want you to be able to, say, hey, no, this is a database cluster, and we have nightly running jobs, but at the same time, we're going to be doing this patching. So we want to give you that flexibility to change how much you want to consolidate. It may still very well be 1 host at a time, depending on your cluster's configuration and your workload running on that cluster. So again, feel free, run through Module 2. Any questions on that? Raise a hand. Any problems in your lab? Raise a hand. All right, for sake of timing, and there is way cooler stuff to talk about. Well, I really like parallel remediation and lifecycle management, but there's a lot of cool stuff to talk about, and I want to excite you guys to drum up some questions. So I'm going to move on into Module 3. Again, there's no rush. Feel free to finish your module. So some of the enhanced performance features that, again, this isn't something, if I say DRS, you're going to go, that's not something new. If you've never heard of DRS before, I'm here to tell you that's Distributed Resource Scheduler. If that blows your mind, just imagine load balancing your workloads between your available ESXi hosts within your cluster, so that you don't have a blistering red hot server and one server sitting there doing nothing. If that's how you prefer to run it, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Most people like their workloads running as best as they can. You virtualize these things for a reason. We give you the ability to automate that placement using something called Distributed Resource Scheduler. So the performance enhancements that have come along the very, very many years of DRS being around is that we have improved upon the technology to be smarter about its placements and recommendations. Back even into the 6X days, we were talking about predictive DRS. We were talking about DRS's ability to predict when the workload was going to hit its peak and start moving things away. We leveraged products like vRealize Operations Manager to augment and offset that predictive DRS ability. And then we slowly started baking that into vSphere to make it so that you didn't have to have an additional product. That DRS performance keeps improving and is improved upon in 8 even more, with the ability to understand the VM workload, because now we are understanding what's inside with the use of VM tools. So VM tools, the guest tools that are installed on the system, they're able to communicate with the hypervisor and allow DRS to understand more about what that demand is and when it's going to hit at what time. But more importantly, we've gotten smarter with DRS in a way that instead of moving things away, sometimes you want to leave them put. Sometimes you have a workload that should not move, because if it moves, it may have the slightest of latency, and that would be bad for that workload. DRS is improved in getting smarter and knowing exactly what to move and what not to move. So, along with that in resource management, another time, I'm going to make your arms hurt today. We're doing a workout class here. Show of hands on anybody who loves fighting with their users or departments when they ask for 64 CPUs and 96 gigs of RAM, because that's what it says in the requirements. That guy back there loves it. He raised his hand. But I can see the sarcastic look on his face. He doesn't. Okay, so starting in hardware version 20, virtual machine hardware version 20, we moved CPU topology to be just a how many CPUs are you asking for? As I'm not going to go into the depths and dive deep into NUMA and topologies, performance topologies of that nature. But instead of having to have you guys sit there and figure out what's going to align best with your hosts and your workload and your virtual machines, whether it's going to be 2 sockets and 8 cores, or 1 socket and 8 core, or 16 cores, if you wanted to play that guess game of where that aligned in your in your NUMA, in your pNUMA boundaries, we made that a lot simpler. So you now say I want this many CPUs, and vSphere is going to go out there in hardware version 20. I want to be very specific. In hardware version 20, that technology is there. It will align your vNUMA and pNUMA boundaries, so you stop running into these weird, I crushed my CPU because I overcommitted cores, or I crushed my host because I overcommitted sockets, and before I even get into the memory space. So that has massive improvements in terms of 6 years from now, when you look back at your environment and your troubleshooting performance day in and day out, why on earth is this so bad? Well, it's more than likely because of CPU overcommitment and some of the other things. You get CPU ready, high CPU wait times, things like that. We're trying to make this a lot easier. So we're taking the guess games out of this. Because the other thing is, you probably keep those virtual machines and upgrade the hardware more than you upgrade the virtual machines. Right? You more than likely aren't destroying virtual machines and recreating them. We're just migrating those off onto new hosts. This topology awareness allows that NUMA topology to move with it. So, additional improvements in CPU latencies and timings under advanced settings. If you have latency aware and latency sensitive workloads, you have the ability to go in and manage that at the VM level. So you can adjust those timings and adjust that latency sensitivity even more. That was definitely something that was introduced in 7, but there's even more functionality now. And that should wrap up Module 3. Is anybody out of Module 3 and on to anything else? Man, there are some speed demons here. Okay. Or one person. There was one person.
So there may be a section in
in the module 2 that's asking you to run a script to proxy off.bat. That needs to be removed out of the manual. Go ahead and ignore and skip over that because it's not going to, it's not necessary, it's not needed. Once we moved the lab into this tenant, we actually put the rules in place to not require that. So if you get to the section in module 2 that's asking you to run the proxy off script in the HOL folder, you can feel free to bypass that. Your lab will work perfectly fine. It's just when we were doing the development of this lab, we put that in the manual, and then they found a fix and a workaround for it, so that script's not required. And if you bypassed that anyway and figured it out or cracked the password, we want to talk to you. And there was a point that someone brought up when they got into the DRS side. I noticed that the DRS score was not reporting as it did in the image. So when I was building out this lab, I must have taken that screenshot probably 15 minutes or an hour or the following day after developing on the lab, so that score comes up, and my score was fantastic. So it's good that I got that picture. But if you're going through this and you wonder why you're not seeing a score yet, well, Distributed Resource Scheduler hasn't really had enough time or need to move your workload, your VMs around and give you that score. So if you're wondering why you're not seeing something or you're waiting for that to happen, it might take a while. DRS is something that once set, you are in there and it is automatically balancing the workloads for you. I got some feedback that I was going way too fast, so I'm slowing down on purpose. If you feel like I'm going way too slow, that's also feedback. And we will try to accommodate everyone. So the whole purpose and point of this lab is there's some people who've not seen any of this. Again, if you've been on older versions, this may be the first time you're seeing 8. Some things might look very, very unusual, which means, if we're talking 6, we're talking about a completely different web client, unless you're in 6.7 or 6.5, where you start to get introduced to the HTML5 client. So for some, this may be a very, very new experience, and others, you might be blistering through it. So it's a little difficult to gauge just the speed of how long it should take to go through these. But as people have left, I do want to say, if you are going to leave, if you end your lab, if you wouldn't mind, there's a survey that pops up. It's a couple of questions. If there's any feedback in there, I do appreciate any feedback, good, bad, or anything in between. What you liked about the lab, what you didn't like about the lab. If you didn't like the way that I presented, you're not hurting my feelings. I do take that and try to be a better person.
Okay, Brad, we have a question. On the app-aware vMotioning that's in this lab, what are the parameters for an app to be eligible for that, for it to be able to be used? We know, for instance, we're SQL aware, database aware, but what else can it do? And what's the best way, I guess, to read up more on that and find out what the limitations are and what apps are supported and et cetera?
Great question. So we don't have great in-depth documentation on that. I don't want to hear myself. We don't have fantastic in-depth on that when it comes to exactly. There's no tuning and things that can be done from the administrator or user's perspective. What is happening is VMware Tools is aware of the services and what is running on that, and those recommendations are more of a profile that is passed back to the hypervisor. Because too much information, and now all of a sudden all I have to do is compromise VM Tools to tell me what's running on it, and I know it's running on the box. So we do more of a profiling of the VM, and not a very specific, that's Microsoft SQL, or that's this, or that's that. What we are doing is looking at how those services and what those things are using, because they are using the core CPU and memory of the host. So we create that as more of a profile that gets passed back down to DRS. Like so yeah, it's not a tunable object. So that's another one of those like, well, I would like to say, tell DRS to leave my stuff alone. That's where I would point you to more of anti-affinity affinity host and VM rules.
So in regards to DRS, I know sometimes in various clusters, with DRS enabled and DRS, the option is set to like the highest available or the highest to make
aggressive.
The most change, most aggressive. Yeah. I still see a lot of unbalance between different hosts in the cluster. I mean, is there anything else that can be done to help, like, spread out the workload, or to make things a little bit more even?
So great question. What ends up happening is we can only do so much in terms of DRS. Like DRS can only do so much. Your workloads can be very sporadic. They're generally not. They're generally very kind of predictive in some ways, unless there's a problem. What I would typically hear when I hear that is that there is more than likely some other issue going on in the cluster, and DRS is not. It's not a fix-it button. In predictive DRS and in the improvements, it's not going to magically correct all of any smaller issues. I would say if you look at your performance charts without me going and saying, load up ARIA operations or, something of that nature, I would look at your CPU host contention, because if you have host contention throughout your cluster, there isn't anywhere that DRS is going to make a movement or an improvement that's going to benefit. So you think of, I'm really oversimplifying this, but think of 2 buckets of water or 2 cups of water, and they're more than half full. Well, how much of that do you pour in this cup? And then this one looks pretty full, and this one looks a little less full. So you pour a little bit more back into it, and again, they have their certain balances. I've had customers try to do things like, well, we do t-shirt sizes. We only do this cluster only has VMs that have 16 gigs of RAM, and so, why am I seeing an imbalance? Well, you're seeing an imbalance because if DRS was to make the recommendation to move workloads, and by workloads I'm being very general, but VMs from, let's say, host 1 over to host 5, now I've just moved that load over here, maybe moved a load over here, so at any point in time, all I'm doing is it's a shell game where I'm constantly moving stuff. And instead of seeing a balance, because now you've got a spike in a workload over here, and then it dies down, but it had just moved. So now it dies down, now you've got it looks like it's not utilized, even though it just moved it over here. That's kind of where this DRS score starts to come in. How effective is DRS at balancing the workload? Instead of, of course, you're going to your cluster view, looking at your host, and you see 80% CPU usage over here and 20 over here. But you also have to consider memory. So you may be overutilizing memory on one host and underutilizing CPU. So unless you're seeing just wide swings of 100%, 90% CPU, 90% memory utilization, and then 20/20, that's probably where you're getting a little bit of that. Again, I'm guessing because I can't know the specifics, but DRS is not going to just magically give you a dividing line and make it, nice 50-50 all the way down. It will do best case. And now that it's more aware of what and when to move those workloads, you should see that, fewer and fewer, but there are still going to be conditions where that might still be the case. Again, heavy memory utilization but very low CPU utilization, well, it has to move it or keep it on that host and move other things away. So maybe your CPU utilization goes up, but your memory utilization goes down. So unless you're tracking both of those metrics, and that would be something where ARIA operations would come in and show more of that balance, and you'd get more of a heat map, and you could maybe even go in and get consolidation recommendations to, like, you've asked for 16 CPUs and you're only using 2. Of course you're going to say, hey, user, I'm going to move 14 CPUs away from you, and they're going to lose their mind or love you for it. probably not the latter, but that would be the CPU host contention. That would, you start to eliminate some of that, and DRS could start to do a more effective job. So if that's going to give you more ammo in your arsenal to go back to your users and say, look, if we right-sized our environment, the tools that are baked into this product would help us, and we'd be able to get higher performance. When I was on the customer side, a very, very hard talk with a person on our apps team who had 72 CPUs over what they used. Not on one VM, several VMs. They said when they clicked the start menu, it took forever for it to even pop up. They wondered what was going on. I said, there's a lot of CPU host contention in this cluster. You are one of the reasons. Your application is using 72 more CPUs than it needs. Not even like trying to cut it down way much. I said, let me claw back 72, and I bet you your start menu opens as soon as you click start. It took me several weeks to convince, but when they finally let me do it, I was right. So this isn't a story about, my past, but that's kind of what you want to see with DRS, and why I'm saying it's not just a simple, okay, we've got the newer DRS, it's going to fix our problems. There are some areas that you may still have to investigate, such as high wait times, ready times on the per host, and kind of get that. If you do have a tool like ARIA Operations, vRealize Operations Manager, that might give you quicker and easier insight into making those recommendations. But it is possible to do just with the performance charts within vSphere. Super long-winded response. Hope that answered. Okay. If anyone else got anything from that, I hope. Okay, in fear of moving on to section 5 and half of you standing up and walking out because I'm going too fast, I'm just going to go through module 5 and talk about it. Oh, module 4, not module 5. I'm sorry. I clicked ahead on the slide, so. Guest OS and workload improvements, a lot of that, again, coming into play with the improvements that VM Tools is allowing and being able to report back into the host. So when we say application-aware DRS or application-aware vMotion, those types of things are what we are going through in this lab. Also, see, that was one of the edits that I was in process. It's not computer maximums reviews. Compute maximum reviews. So configmax.vmware.com is more what I'm referring to. The compute maximums have increased as we continue to grow and scale the product. 96 hosts, a whole bunch more memory, a whole lot of additional CPUs. I think you can assign an absolutely absurd number of CPUs per VM. Reason being, those workloads haven't increased. Say like SAP HANA, for example, is not one of those that is a light usage of resources. And you got to understand, when we increase compute maximums, we increase compute maximums across the cluster and across the vCenter and your software-defined data centers and your vCenters, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So just like when you saw up here, the lab that you're taking using 288 gigs of memory and 3 terabytes of disk, these compute maximums have to continue to grow as those workload requirements grow. So that module will cover some of that. Is there anybody done with Module 4 and into Module 5? All right. Wow. Okay. There's a little more than 30 minutes in this lab. And I don't know if it must have been a really good lunch because you're really quiet after lunch today. That's okay. But I'll go in and talk about Module 5 just a little bit. Please raise your hand. Please stop if you have a question. If you want to go back, I can talk about anything all the way back to Module 1 if you'd like. In Module 5, if you are getting to that, we cover and go into green metrics. This was something that was introduced in 8, exclusively in 8GA. It works very well with ARIA operations and your green score and your green metrics, the sustainability dashboards that are pre-baked into that product. But what this is baked into vSphere 8. We are collecting green metric data for your running workloads, for your VMs. So, once upon a time, thank you. Once upon a time, we came into the data center and we went from hundreds of physical hosts down to dozens of physical hosts, or thousands of physical hosts down to hundreds of physical hosts, and we realized the amount of power and cooling and floors, data center size and rack space that all of that took, and we could go back and say, look at what we saved. We knew that we could do that, and we could do it very easily and very accurately and very well. Well, after we virtualized it, how much does that VM cost to run? I don't know, we got like 20 of them running on there, so I guess we're doing right. We've got good consolidation, workloads running fine, it's not, suffering in performance. So whatever, the host it's running on uses that much power, and that's what we adhere to. Well, what does it cost that application to run? That might be important if I have a data center in Southern California where the cost of power is 20 cents a kilowatt, instead of in Washington where the cost of power is 5 cents a kilowatt. If I wanted to run my workloads and I wanted to run the ones that require a lot of compute and are going to use the most power, how would I determine that? We had no way to do it. These green metrics in your green metric store is more about sustainability and more about helping you understand the cost of those running VMs. And we do so because we are collecting it at the hypervisor level. So you can go in and actually look at the your advanced dashboard at the host and see what the power consumption of those VMs are using. You can enhance this, of course, in ARIA operations and the sustainability dashboards. You can do advanced reports, on I'm running on wind power, or I purchase a certain amount of wind power or nuclear power, and the rest is coal. You can actually start to generate some of these reports because of the green metrics that we're collecting from ESX and on those workloads. So if you don't have sustainability goals or initiatives in place right now, that may be something that interests you. You need to say, like, this is how much this application stack, or this is what this cluster truly costs to run. Because right now you would go into your IPMIs, IDRACs, your ILOs, and you'd look at your power consumption, or maybe you have fancy APCs that are giving your power draw. But what is that over time? That might be a one snapshot point in time. This is how much the power is right now. You get stuff that collects, and at the ESXi level, you get at least 30 days stored locally. You get into other products that augment it, like ARIA operations, and you can now say, this is how much this costs to run. This is how much it's going to predicted to cost to run. Start to do what if analysis and things of that nature. So really cool. Definitely a feature that had been asked. Definitely something that wasn't something that was just easy to come by. We're not making these numbers up. This is how you're able to get in here and truly understand at that level what it costs to run your workloads. So I don't want to completely wrap up in Q&A. We have 30 minutes. Again, please feel free to take your time, ask questions. The only reason I'm standing up here, I usually do like to walk around a little bit more. They're recording me, so I'm just a man in the box. So, but my associate here, Jake, will actually ask me a question.
No, I just wanted to mention that we are pulling the green metrics for the whole lab systems, and they're up at the door on the control center screens. You can see our CO2 usage, how much we're saving because we're virtualized versus running off physical servers, et cetera. So it's pretty cool to look at what we're doing up there and power draw and all of that stuff. So that's it.
That's a great point.
Any other questions?
I do have a bonus for those who have stayed, minus the please take your survey that I already talked about a little bit. I want to throw this one up here. It's because they, no. Okay, give me 1 second. I've got a slide that I don't know why it didn't. I can show this slide now. So, a little show of hands now that everyone is thinned out a little bit. So right now the current release is 8 update 1C. So, awesome. Maybe you're not on 8 yet because you wait for that N-1. Well, we're on update 1, so you should be on 8GA. Whatever your policy is. I want to, just say, hey, update 1C is available today, right now. Announced today would be the Q3 release of update 2 for vSphere 8. So with that, and this is so new to me, I wasn't able to put this in until just now. So with this, you have even more efficiencies that have been improved upon. We have gotten upgrades down to just a couple of minutes, where even at the beginning of this talk track, I was saying how we could get it down to between 5 to 10 minutes with quick boot being enabled. So some of those things, again, at scale, you got a massive cluster. Instead of it taking 10 hours, we're now getting it down to an hour. Your time is valuable and important, and that's something we want to make sure. We have the ability to bring in Azure AD as a third-party identity provider, something that's been asked for many years. Well, definitely for most recently. So we now have the ability to integrate in with Active Directory, Azure AD as your identity provider. Help streamline some of that. So I did not get a chance to see the entire keynote. Some of the things that were new, starting back in 7, we started increasing those compute maximums for vGPUs and GPU pass-throughs to those. So there's even in 8 update 2, there's even more there that's going to allow you to share up to 16 vGPUs per VM, which is a huge amount of processing power. As you can imagine, there's probably a reason, and that reason is for AI workloads, as those have definitely grown over the more recent months. This is something that's been a big ask from our AI-heavy customers. So if you have any AI initiatives, we are very heavily invested in vSphere and showing that what's coming here in update 2. With that, we're also introducing GPU-aware load balancing. Think of it more like DRS for GPU. So you're not just going to hammer one GPU. We can actually start splitting that load that you've provisioned out to your VMs across multiple GPUs in your host. We do more. We have more vendors coming in with DPU, data processing unit support. I think we from Fujitsu and Lenovo. So we have more. We're including more support for DPUs. So it's not just coming from NVIDIA. We have support from those other two. So there's improvements. If anybody has DevOps, and I'm not super spun up on this, but we have more flexibility with image management for the VM registry service coming built in to vSphere. So that image registry service, we are the main contributor in CNCF for Harbor, which is an image registry. So that is coming in and being more built and baked in to the vSphere and the product itself. So we're opening up the API even more and making improvements to be able to provision those GPUs and more of the enhanced hardware services to those VMs through the API. So more automation. So you're not, oh, it's GPU based. No, it's got to go over and be manually created. Now we're opening that up so it's more readily available to your developers and your development operations. And then I don't know too much about this, so if you had to ask me, I would have to say I'd have to point you to somewhere else. But we've made marked improvements in the setup process for the supervisor clusters, using a more repeatable model. I'd imagine as we continue to develop on desired state and more of our infrastructure as code is moving into the product, that's where I see these changes and improvements coming along. So if you have clusters or you have vCenters that have like a developer only, if you're segmenting your workloads that way, I'd imagine there's some pretty marked improvements for your DevOps coming here in Update 2. So thank you. I appreciate everyone who stuck around. I know it's towards the end of the day, your feet are tired, just had lunch. It's and it's not easy listening to me. So I thank you for staying. And again, sorry to beat the drum again, but I really do appreciate the feedback. It's not just for me, it's for all the captains, Jake, Samya. We all really appreciate the feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see more of. If you'd like this is more of a beginner lab. And we do have an advanced lab that we cover, because I do understand some of these topics, they feel like they're breezed over a little bit. Give that feedback. If you'd like to see it be more detailed, I'd be happy to oblige.